Okay, I'm sure people are going to keep coming in, but I've been told that there's lots of you here and we're going to begin. Before I introduce myself and introduce the panel, I just wanted to say a little bit about Brook. We are a national charity that supports people with their sexual health and well-being and offer a range of services which all go towards supporting our mission of helping people to live healthier lives. Last year we supported 1.43 million people through our kind of unique combination of activities and services, and that includes community sexual health services, including STI and contraceptive care, but also delivering relationships and sex education around the country and supporting teachers with face-to-face and e-training. We provide outreach in community settings and wellbeing programs and counselling, and our life course approach to sexual health and wellbeing mean that people can benefit from our holistic services at any stage of their life. We always try and ensure that Brook spaces are safe and non-judgmental, and we welcome different voices and perspectives. We always want participants, whether it's in a classroom or a training room, to feel comfortable. And insofar as this format allows us an opportunity, or allows you an opportunity to ask questions and make observations, we hope that you will do so in a spirit of openness and respectfulness and communicating. And you will be able to ask questions at any time during the event through the Q&A function, and we will pick those up as we go along, but hopefully make specific time at the end of the call for your questions and answers. I'm very excited to be chairing this. It's the fourth and last session of our inaugural Safeguarding Conference, which we're holding as part of Sexual Health Week. I hope some of you have attended the earlier sessions. Two of them, Safeguarding in a Mental Health Crisis and Safeguarding in the Age of AI, were recorded, and they'll be free to access soon. And we are recording this session too. One final message before we kick off, which is a big thank you to EGU, our generous sponsor. 8 years ago, we worked with them to launch Brook Learn, which is our award-winning digital learning platform for teachers. And since that time, we've launched 15 courses and supported over 32,000 educators with their RSHE practice. So thank you very much, EGU, for that collaboration over the years and for your support today. So I'm Lisa Hallgarten. I'm Head of Policy and Public Affairs at Brook, and much of my career has been spent advocating for high quality, inclusive relationship, sex and health education, although it hasn't always been called that. When I started this work, I probably thought we'd not just have won the argument, but also won the funding and all the support the subject needs by now. But unfortunately, we haven't quite got there yet. Over those 20 years I've been in the field, I've seen enormous changes in what we teach. So much of the history of sex education has been about STI prevention and unintended pregnancy. And those issues definitely haven't gone away. But sexual health now sits alongside an absolutely enormous range of topics that form part of this broad RSHE curriculum. And it's a curriculum which has been transformed in response to constantly changing and increasingly complex challenges facing young people. RSHE is expected to prevent, address, mitigate so many harms experienced in young people's lives, from sexual abuse and exploitation to exposure to extreme pornography, misogyny, different forms of discrimination, coercive control, sexual violence, mental health issues, and much more. The list goes on. And it's definitely not an accident that RSHE was made mandatory as part of safeguarding legislation. And that's something we'll be hearing more about from Sarah Champion MP in a few moments. The government is currently in the process of revising the statutory RSHE guidance, and it's a review that you've probably noticed is taking place in the context of significant misconceptions about what RSHE is and what RSHE does. It does feel now like a timely moment to address some of that misinformation and also to remind ourselves of the vital role that RSHE plays in safeguarding our children and young people. So I'm really delighted that we're having this session today. We've got a brilliant panel, all bringing a range of different perspectives to this discussion, and we're going to hear from each of them in turn. But in order to make sure we have time towards the end, do pop your to answer questions. Do pop your Q&As in the box as they arise for you. So don't wait until the end to put them in there. I'm going to leave people to introduce themselves more fully just before they do their individual presentations, but just to let you know who we've got today: Lucy Emerson from Sex Education Forum, who we've been working closely with for many years; Maria Nia-Futu from NSPCC; Jo Mackenzie, Safeguarding Lead for Multi Academy Trust, the Howard Partnership Trust; Nick Dunn from Brook; and Ithar Ghalifa from Make It Mandatory. And I want to thank you all for being here today, but especially Ithar, who's stepped in at the 11th hour to replace her fellow member and the founder of Make It Mandatory campaign, Faustine Petron. Sarah Champion can't be with us live today, but she kindly took time out of her outrageously busy schedule to record a video for us, and we're going to play that video for everybody now.
Hello, my name is Sarah Champion. I'm very proud to be the Labour MP for Rotherham. I was first elected in November 2012, and pretty shortly after that I became, well, to be quite honest, mortified by the level of child sexual exploitation that had been happening and was still happening in my town. I'll be honest with you, I didn't particularly know what it was. I certainly didn't know what the signs were, but it led me to find out, and quite quickly my mission became to prevent child abuse wherever I found it, in whatever form I found it. One of the things that kept on being raised with me is, how is a child meant to know that they're being abused? If from the age of 2 you've been abused by your uncle, for example, and he's told you that it's a secret, that you're not to tell anybody, that it's perfectly normal, how do you know? How do you know that that's something that's wrong? How do you know who you can trust, who you can tell that to? How do you know to get justice? And then one of the great frustrations is, at a later age in life, so maybe in your 20s when you are able to reflect, or maybe you have children of your own, you realise that what happened to you was abuse, and then it's used against you when you try and report it because you didn't report it at the time. It happens all the time. Child abuse is, as you know, sadly endemic in this country as it is around the world, and anything we can do to prevent that has to be an absolute mission that we all subscribe to. So today we're here because of Brook and the amazing work that they do in this space, and I worked with Brook and about 40 other organisations, activists, survivors and a load of MPs to get my campaign, Dare to Care. It looks a little dated now, but the information is still out there on the web if you want it, which was looking at a national action plan to prevent child abuse. And the one overriding thing that I kept on hearing again and again and again was relationship education from primary school age. That is the one thing that we could do to try and get ahead and prevent children being abused in the future. It's also about making children feel confident in who they are, be able to challenge discrimination or hatred, recognise discrimination and hatred. So for me, it became the absolute no-brainer that that's what I needed to do. There was an opportunity in 2017 when a bill came forward to make my passion for RSHE at the time, become law. And I worked cross-party, and I'm incredibly grateful to the Right Honourable Maria Miller, who worked with me, to get MPs to support my amendment. And in June, I think it was, 2017, it became law that every primary school child should have RSE and every secondary school child should have RSHE. That's, 6 years ago. And unfortunately, I'm assuming that some of you are here because we still haven't got all of the resources and all of the rollout that we need from government so that every child can have that basic education. It's sort of worse than that because things have moved on, and I'm really glad that this week we passed the next stage of the online safety bill, and specific within that is making sure that children are not able to access pornography. I don't know about you, but when I was a child, the only access to porn I had was maybe discovering a magazine under my dad's bed. As I got a bit older, I know that some of my friends had access to probably their dad's videos, but that was it. Now for children, we know that children as young as 8 are routinely being able to access porn on their phones. And the concern of that for me is at that age, it comes before the sex education that they have. So they're seeing porn as not a fantasy, but as a reality. And I don't know about you, but I am just deeply upset at the number of children when I go into schools to talk around relationship education that think that anal sex or being strangled is a normal part of a relationship. It's not. It's a fantasy. It's a choice. There's such a thing as consent, and we need to make sure that all children know that as technology, particularly online technology, gallops ahead of where our education is at. I'm frustrated that we still haven't had the outcome of the review into either trans guidance in school or RSHE guidance. I know that teachers are crying out for this updated review into what is and isn't appropriate to teach at whatever age. I'm putting as much pressure on the government as I can to get that information out to you, but I would say anything you can do to lobby your MPs to get the outcome of those reviews into the public domain would be really, really helpful, because not only do you need it, the children that you support need it. The other thing is thinking about the future, thinking about how fast abusers use technology particularly, but also the systems and the legislation that's currently in place to access children, to exploit children. And I just want to make sure that going forward, the government is as agile as it can be to be updating the guidance, to be updating the training and giving you the funding and support that you need to be able to make the difference that I know you all want to do. So I have to say thank you for consistently supporting me and other MPs as we try and get more protections around children and get more up to date and more relevant RSE and RSHE. But thank you for what you do on a daily basis and for making the commitment to be here for this seminar. Anything I can do to help in the future, let me know, and I'll keep on holding the government's feet to the fire until all children in this country are safe and able to understand a healthy to an exploitative relationship. Thank you again.
My thanks go to Sarah and her team for creating that video, which is a really useful summary of why RSHE got into safeguarding legislation in the first place. And she's been a stalwart in this. You might have seen behind her, there was a little card where she pledged to support inclusive, high quality RSHE. And that's all part of a campaign to allow MPs to pledge, but also individuals and organisations to pledge to support high quality inclusive RSHE, and we'll be posting a link to that campaign so that you can all join in if you want to. I'm going to move on to Lucy now. I know she's going to have to leave quite shortly, so if you've got questions for her that you can squeeze into the Q&A in the next 10 minutes, she might be able to answer one or two of them. Lucy, please tell us a bit about the forum's work and about how RSHE can support safeguarding.
Thank you, Lisa. It was lovely to hear Sarah sort of taking me back in time a little bit there to the work that so many colleagues and organisations did together a few years ago. But actually that built on 3 decades of work to help people to understand what good quality relationships and sex education involves and help people to understand the research evidence. And the Sex Education Forum began in 1987, so we're going back several decades there. And we are a national charity dedicated to promoting good quality RSE, which we know benefits the physical and mental health of children and young people. And the way we work is by bringing partners and a wider group of stakeholders together to share good practice, to look at and understand and extend the research and evidence, and to monitor the provision of RSE now that we have it as a statutory subject. So do find out more about us if you're not familiar already. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the research evidence with the hope that everybody listening will feel increasingly confident about that very conclusive research evidence base for relationships and sex education. The research really did underpin the move towards mandatory RSHE, and that research has only become sort of deeper and broader. It still says the same things, it still finds the same things. It draws on international research, national research, a range of different types of research, including randomized control trials, and also the voices of young people who experience RSE themselves. And what that research says, essentially, is that list of bullet points on my slide. When young people have received relationships and sex education, they are more likely to seek help or to speak out. So if they've been abused already, they would be more able to report it quickly rather than for that to wait several years before they're able to recognise it. Young people are also more likely to practice safe sex and have improved health outcomes, some of the things we perhaps associated RSE with when some of the campaigning work began for statutory RSE, that kind of sexual health starting point. Young people are also more likely to have consented to the first sexual experience they have, and for that first sex to happen at an older age. More likely also to have an understanding of digital safety in the modern age in relation to RSE, and to be more knowledgeable about discrimination, gender equity and sexual rights. And finally, to be less likely to be a victim or perpetrator of sexual violence. Research evidence can feel quite overwhelming. Reading academic papers can make one feel sleepy if it's not your thing, but we put together a really concise evidence briefing. There's a kind of longer version which you can dip into, and also a really concise summary which are freely available from our website. Do share them with any stakeholders you think would find them useful. I've just put a little bit of a spotlight on 3 examples of the research that make up some of the findings I've been summarising there. So that example I've highlighted from Cochrane, where we start kind of chronologically thinking about how relationships education in particular can help to keep children safe by enabling them to recognise what could be abusive and to seek help at an earlier age. It has quite profound findings, really, in terms of the number of children who were able to disclose as a result of having a school-based education intervention compared to those who didn't. Then if we look at some more recent research from which has been reported recently by the Youth Endowment Fund in their excellent research toolkit, they found that relationship violence prevention lessons lead to a reduction in violence of about 17%. So really measurable, tangible bit of research there, expanding our thinking beyond the sexual health, the STIs, the teenage pregnancy. But interestingly, these worlds are connected, and relationships and sex, they're an integrated whole. And the third little study I've highlighted there highlights that actually to get those outcomes around sexual health and STI reduction, it requires RSE to address gender and power. And it is so much more effective when it does. And that's talking about gender in the broadest sense, talking about gender equality, addressing gender roles and stereotypes, which affects absolutely everybody. So yeah, there's lots of fascinating research. We can get into the detail, but be really confident about what we know through those summaries. Sex Education Forum are also very keen to hear directly from young people regularly about what they're experiencing. And since that statutory provision came in 2017, obviously it takes some time for that to be implemented, and there have been some delays along the way due to COVID, etc. But we're very keen to ensure that that rollout is really happening and to hear that directly from young people. So we've been carrying out polls repeatedly to check in with young people about their actual experiences of RSE at school today. And our most recent poll was in the field with 1,000 young people aged 16 and 17 last December. And here's just some of the highlights from that poll. So we found that 40% of young people had experienced good or very good RSE at school in their rating of it. Pupils were mixed in their opinions about whether or not enough time had been dedicated to those lessons. So that was a sort of 50-50 split indicated by that little clock up there. We also asked young people about the quality of that RSE. Was it the format they wanted? And what young people wanted more of was open discussion. They wanted facts too, but they wanted more spaces to discuss. On that slide, you'll also see a little bar graph summarising which topics were least and most neglected from a list of 27 topics that we asked young people to tell us more about. And you can see here that some of the topics that are most confidently adequately addressed. So things like bullying and puberty and conception, and actually sexual consent came on that list too, on the green list. And then on the blue list, we can see things like power imbalances, pornography, culture and faith perspectives, LGBTQ plus information and healthy relationships. These are at the heart of children and young people's concerns and needs for keeping safe, and yet these topics were not addressed at all or adequately in about 50% of cases or more. So I'm going to now take a little bit of a look at those topics and that we might call safeguarding topics. But actually, I also want to throw open that question of what is a safeguarding topic, because the research tells us that for relationships and sex education to be effective, it has to be comprehensive. So it needs to cover the full breadth of topics to really have those impacts we want to see. But picking out some topics we might think of as particularly directly relevant to safeguarding, the pink bar is showing us which topics young people hadn't learned anything about at all. So it's in that kind of hierarchy on that graph. And then I've just highlighted where things like FGM fall top of that list there, a topic that many young people left school effectively not learning anything about. And that's for young people telling us at the end of 2022. And working down the list, these are all the safeguarding topics that absolutely every child and young person should get covered in their school RSHE, and which the government guidance entitles them to receive. So there is further to go to fully implement the guidance, which we know is underpinned by research that says it will make an enormous difference to young people's lives. Young people also told us in their own words what would improve relationships and sex education at school for them. Sometimes they talked about topics, but largely they talked about the competence of their teachers, who they really wanted to be able to feel more confident and less embarrassed, who they really wanted to feel empowered to answer their questions and to have those open discussions and to be really clear about their LGBTQ plus inclusive approach. So I'm going to start wrapping up now just with the key direction of travel really that we need to see to have RSHE make the maximum impact on keeping children and young people safe. We know from the research evidence that we need to lay foundations early for RS to be effective. That's where the safeguarding will be built from, through good early foundations, then sequencing so that those topics are covered effectively in their due order and time. We need guidance that is clearer about the research evidence on pedagogy. So the research says that skills development needs to be part and parcel of RSE, learning social skills, interpersonal skills, communication skills, things that cannot start early enough and give us the underpinnings to manage our relationships later on. Learning also needs to be participatory. And teachers then need adequate support and training to be able to respond to questions that young people bring up. Not just to follow a kind of set script. And then parental involvement is key. I haven't gone into detail on this, but the research evidence says that when parents and school are working together, RSE is more effective. Young people want that to happen too. And we need to match that sustained parental involvement with bringing young people's voices in at the school level and at a national level, and to make sure those early foundations go through to form lifelong learning so that RSE extends from 16 to 19 and into adult life as well. Do have a look at the resources I've referred to today and many more, which you'll find on the Sex Education Forum website, where you can also discover our wide list of partner organisations, and we welcome new partners and members all the time. I'm sure you'll enjoy the rest of the conference, and I hope you found that useful in supporting your confidence around the research evidence.
Thank you so much, Lucy. I think people feel really reassured when they see how robust the evidence is around RSHE. And one of the things that I know we worked on together recently was a kind of mythbuster, which is on your website, to try and reassure people who've listened to a lot of misinformation about RSHE that it's safe and it's a good thing. I'm really sorry that you have to leave us. I don't know if you've got time for two very quick questions, which I'm sure these are questions you've thought about a lot, so it's going to be not too difficult for you to answer them. And one is, what are your hopes and fears for the revised RSHE guidance that's due to be issued soon?
Okay, I'll start with my fears. My fears are that a narrow focus on age ratings is missing the point, and could set the revised guidance up to fail. We need to be thinking about the earliest foundations, giving teachers confidence to start their relationships education early and to plan it out really well, to have time to plan it and to sequence it. So that's the way we need to be thinking. My hopes are linked to that, in that if we draw really properly on the research evidence, which tells us that sequencing should be there and the pedagogy should be more focused on skills and enabling discussion, and then we'll get it right. So it's really as simple as looking at the research evidence and following that, rather than blowing with the wind around the politics on it.
I think that's really clear, brilliant answer, and I think it is being politicised at the moment, and I think you're right, the research speaks loud and clear, so let's hope the government is looking at the research. One more question before you go, if you've got time, which is, setting aside the guidance, what one thing do you think could significantly improve RSHE to make sure that it really reaches its potential in safeguarding children and young people?
It's absolutely about training and support for teachers. Teachers are the resource. They are the people that young people are referring to. And if we're able to empower them through the training that they've been asking for, RSE can adapt, it can flex, it can meet the changing needs of each classroom that they're presented with, because no two lessons will be identical. It's the teachers that's the stable core resource. We need to support them.
Thank you, Lucy. I'm going to let you go. You might reappear later. Thank you very much for that. I think it was really clear. Lots of people have been asking about your presentation, but I think everything in your presentation is drawn from your document on RSE, the evidence, and the young people's poll, which are very available. We've put links in the chat already. And the evidence is going to be presented soon as a very digestible video, so Lucy kindly gave Brook permission to trawl through her brilliant evidence document and pull out the evidence to turn it into an animation, which is going to be very easy for people to use and watch and digest. So thank you very much, Lucy, and hopefully we'll see you later.
Thanks, Lisa.
And I was going to ask Maria next to tell us a bit about her work and how RSHE and safeguarding are interlinked and intertwined within the work that the NSPCC does. Welcome, Maria, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Lisa. It's my pleasure to be here and to tell you a bit about our work at the NSPCC. So why is RSE so important to us? Well, our mission is simple. It's to prevent child abuse and neglect, and that's been our mission for over 100 years. And we're constantly learning about prevention. And one thing we've learned is that education programs, starting from an early age, are an absolute cornerstone of preventing abuse and neglect. So we've made education central to our strategy. We start in the early years with a program called Talk Pants. We continue through primary school with our Speak Out, Stay Safe program, and that we're now in secondary schools with Talk Relationships. We operate a national school service, which allows us to have a relationship with every school in the country, in all 4 nations and the Channel Islands, because we believe every child, irrespective of what their national jurisdictions are saying, has a right to high quality RSE, and we offer our materials to schools for the most part for free. We've talked a lot about evidence already today, and I think it is worth grounding everything we do in what years and years of international evidence have shown us, which is that high quality RSE improves children's understanding of what constitutes abuse and inappropriate behaviours. It helps children reflect on their own experiences and attitudes and promotes a positive school culture. It provides an opportunity to make sure that all young people know that they have a right to be treated and a responsibility to treat others with dignity and respect. And finally, it also increases the likelihood that young people will come forward and disclose experiences of abuse. So that's why we think it's so critical. With such incontrovertible evidence, we believe all children should have access to high quality, inclusive, age and developmentally appropriate RSE, because we know these lessons are crucial in safeguarding children. Given the current political discourse about RSE, let me say a few words about what we mean about age and developmentally appropriate. So we believe RSE should start early. Our own Talk Pants programme targets children, parents and carers in the early years, and Pantosaurus and his catchy jingle have been staples of young children's preschool education for over 10 years now. It's never too early for children to learn the pants rule, which is private's a private, always remember your body belongs to you, no means no, talk about secrets that upset you, speak up, someone can help. And these are simple, age-appropriate messages that children can understand with the help of videos and storybooks, Our Friendly Dinosaur, and even Alexa. So if you've got Alexa, just say open NSPCC and you can access all of these materials. We have pants in Makaton and BSL. We've adapted it for children with autism and learning difficulties, and we have it in over 80 languages. So with these early foundations around bodily integrity, we believe it's important to then reinforce and build on these messages at every stage of a child's education. In primary school, we deliver a programme called Speak Out, Stay Safe. It's available to all primary schools in the country, and we've delivered, I think, in about 90% of them now. And the programme consists of a virtual assembly, which features Ant and Dec, and workshops that are delivered in schools by our trained volunteers that explain to children in an interactive and age-appropriate way what abuse is, how to spot the signs, what to do if they're worried about a child. We've had this independently evaluated, and which shows that it's having an impact and that it's much needed. And this is part of the evidence I referenced earlier about the importance of education in keeping children safe. In secondary schools, we deliver Talk Relationships, which is focused on teachers, which Lucy highlighted as so important here, and increasing their confidence around delivering RSE. So we have e-learning for teachers, we've got lesson plans, and we have a dedicated helpline. Our lesson plans for Talk Relationships were developed in partnership with the PSHE Association, and they are grouped into recommended age ranges, which builds upon one another in terms of the age appropriateness of the content and the complexity of the learning. We keep this under constant review. It's not a fixed thing. It's based on evidence, and it's also based on the feedback that we gather from teachers themselves and from children and young people. We give guidance and support to teachers about how to create a safe learning environment and how to handle difficult questions as they come up. And we recommend that teachers exercise their professional judgment in planning lessons and responding to their class needs, which they know best. We don't recommend any changes to the current guidance, which might require some topics to be taught at older ages than they currently are. This runs contrary to all the latest evidence. The government's review panel has chosen to look at LGBT content, sexual harassment and violence, pornography, changing adolescent body, and evidence indicates that children are being exposed to these topics at younger and younger ages. A snapshot of some of that evidence. In Childline, we handle about 7,500 counselling sessions a year around sex and relationships. And about 400 of these where we know the age of the child is with a child aged 11 or under. Police and crime stats are consistently shocking. 8,500 rapes of children in England and Wales under the age of 13 per year. All children are online now. Ofcom data says that 1 in 5 internet users in the UK is a child, and our research estimates that 3,500 online child sexual abuse crimes happen every month online, and we've seen an 80% rise in grooming. So with that context in mind, RSE is more important than ever. Finally, I just wanted to highlight, we think it's really important to include children, it's children's feedback and children's voices in how we design RSE. We conducted a piece of participatory research with Cardiff University and UCL, and our report, We Have to Educate Ourselves, is available on the NSPCC Learning website. Some of the key messages we heard from children that we spoke to is that currently they find their RSE experience is too little too late. It's particularly inadequate in the teaching of certain topics, namely periods, sexual and gender identity, sex, masturbation, pleasure, and a failure to be LGBT inclusive. 42% of young people report they have to educate themselves, and 54% say the teaching in school rarely or never covers what they want, but the majority say they would like to receive high quality teaching in school and not in other sources. They told us that gender and sexual violence, both online and offline, is commonplace, and this corroborates everyone's invited, and the Ofsted and Eston reports into violence in schools. And they told us that they really want us to normalise and destigmatise RSE learning, and they want it to be a much more positive and fun experience in the classroom. So with all of that in mind, I want to leave you with my final messages around RSE, which are: start early, trust the evidence and the expertise of the RSE professionals, make RSE compulsory in all 4 nations, listen to children and respond to their needs, and hold the line on the breadth of the content, on teacher agency and flexibility, and on child voice. Together we can prevent child abuse and neglect, but only by progressing forwards and not going backwards.
Thank you, Maria. That was fabulous. I thought those, your key points at the end were so sort of clear and spoke to not just the evidence, but the experience of educators and young people around the country, and really hope that we achieve those things. But certainly Brook and the 80 organisations who've signed our pledge so far are definitely keen to hold the line, as you say, on the breadth of the curriculum. I had a question that I had, which is I thought I'd love you to answer before you have to shoot off, which is how you respond to some of the kind of discourse and conversation that's been going on recently, which suggests that RSHE is robbing children of their innocence.
I think if we're concerned about innocence, not the word I'd necessarily use, but I understand the intention of the question, you need more RSE, not less. I think Lucy referenced the evidence around when you teach RSE early, children are far more likely to delay sexual activity, and they're far more likely to engage in safe sex and healthy relationships. It is okay to talk about sex before children are sexually active. It's not about encouraging them to have sex. In fact, it does the opposite, the research tells us. And you have to start with the messages early if children are going to understand concepts around consent and concepts around when they're ready. If we don't start early and we take away this messaging from schools, then children are nevertheless going to seek it out. That's another thing the evidence tells us, and they will seek it out from unsafe sources and unsafe places. So schools really are the very best place to learn. And all the evidence is telling us that the earlier you start, actually, the safer children are. So with people with that intent who care about safeguarding, I think you need more RSE, not less.
Thank you. That's a fantastic answer. We've got a question just about the statistic that you quoted about the increase in grooming, and someone couldn't work out if you meant 18% or 80%.
80%.
80%, a huge increase in grooming. And is that related, do you think, to COVID and the amount of time people are spending online, or is there any explanation for where that comes from?
Yeah, the amount of time children have been spending online has been going up anyway, but in COVID, it went up a lot more. A lot of children have access to devices and smartphones from an earlier age now. Because the internet has been designed and grown in an unregulated way, the safeguards that you'd expect to see in place are not there, and therefore it is easier for people with intent to harm to approach people online, because the safeguards just aren't as strong. We are hoping next week to be celebrating an online safety bill, making it through Parliament, which will start to regulate the online world so that we feel safer about our young people being online, because we want them to be online, but we want it to be a safer place where they're not so exposed to things like grooming offences and sexual violence.
That's really interesting. We've had one final question, and then I'm going to move on to our next panelist, which is, how can we work to overcome resistance from some faith groups? It says here, in particular, some Islamic communities have been very vocal about this, but actually I think when we looked at the some of the pushback against RSE, it's actually come from a variety of different religious communities. So how can we work to overcome that resistance? And I think maybe it's a really good question for you, Maria, specifically in relation to younger children.
I think because of the nature of the debate and the way it's playing out, there are a lot of myths out there and a lot of misconceptions around what RSE is and what it's intended to do. And I think the way of overcoming these myths that are prevalent among parents of all faiths, from what I have seen, is to engage in dialogue and to be very open about the research, why RSE is important and what we're teaching children. The reason I enumerated all the pants rules is because I wanted people to hear the messages that we're talking to very young children about, because I think when parents hear that, they respond really positively. They understand that it's making their children safer. So we need to be more vocal. We need to be engage in dialogue, bring people into this conversation, and help them understand that we share the positive intention and love they have for their children, and we're coming at this from the same place, and try and get rid of all the noise over here about the myths around what we're trying to do with RSE.
I think that's really lovely, especially thinking about our intentions for their children as being loving and kind. And I know that you're going to have to go in a bit, but
sorry, I will stay until 5:30 and hear from the others, and I apologise if I miss anyone.
But no, it's been absolutely lovely to have you, and I think what you said, especially about talking to parents, is a really brilliant segue into introducing Jo, because I know that talking to parents has been a really important part of your work around developing high quality RSHE in your multi-academy trust.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this afternoon. As Lisa said, I work in education. I spent 12 years as a DSL in a secondary school in Surrey, and now I work as a leading safeguarding across a multi-academy trust that educates children aged 3 to 19 in primary, secondary, special phases. The brief I was given from Lisa was to share how we think that it's a relationship between RSE and safeguarding. So I thought it would be useful to maybe share our journey over the last couple of years. The start of our journey began with everyone's invited in Soma Sara's personal story regarding her sexual assault and harassment during her adolescent years. And at the time, we were seeing a very small number of disclosures from often girls reporting sexual assault and again, often rape. But it wasn't generally what we were seeing. Following the publication of the Ofsted Review into Sexual Abuse in Schools and Colleges in June 21, I think we can all agree that there was collective discomfort in the findings. And it was around this time we launched a working group, and we didn't really know what the focus of that working group was. It was just to really unpick some of the issues around the review, what we'd seen around Everyone's Invited, and just see where it took us. And the main points that really resonated with me was that I felt that our starting point should be that Ofsted had stated that the frequency of these harmful sexual behaviours mean that some children consider them as normal, and that they're so commonplace that children see no point in reporting them. And we found, and we still find, that children say to us that they have trusted adults, and they are happy to disclose when they are in need of help. Apart from, there is a barrier when it comes to anything of the sexual nature. Ofsted, you'll remember, specifically said to schools, don't spend time investigating whether this is happening in your school, just assume it was. So that's where we started. So what was our action going to be? Children told us that, as I said, they all had trusted adults, but how do we remove that barrier to disclosure? As part of our normal safeguarding procedures across the trust, we complete safeguarding peer reviews biannually. And it was during a secondary peer review in October 21 that we decided to be brave and launch single gender student voice activities. And young people confirmed that Ofsted's findings were accurate. Children shared thoughts and opinions regarding why they thought these things were happening. We heard comments like, you warn us about periods, but why does no one tell us that one day we'll pick up our phone and there'll be a naked picture on there? Boys shared that they knew where the line was between banter and harassment, while others said, well, but where in the curriculum is the aspect that covers relationships and signalling to a girl that you might like her? There's a fine line between flirting and messing around and harassment. And these were just a flavour of what we heard, but empowered us to do better for the young people in our establishments. Our first priority was to remove the stigma about language and the barriers to children disclosing it. And it was around that time that we started to talk to Brook. And I can't emphasize enough how much I love the Brook traffic light tool. You know, if anyone's tempted to look into it, please do. In November 21, we invested in training 12 members of staff to become trained trainers under the trainers model, who could deliver face-to-face training sessions in 3 hours. And whilst it was certainly a commitment, because you're only allowed to deliver in groups of 20 people, we trained almost 600 staff and a further 200 using the online method. And the outcome was that staff were more confident in identifying sexualised behaviours and managing these in the classroom. We saw a huge increase in disclosures, particularly important in our experience, as it was said earlier with the other panellists, that children who are being abused or have been abused aren't always aware that they're actually being abused. The abusers normalise it. And we were able to monitor trends and be proactive in our strategies. So on several occasions, we reshaped our PSHE curriculum. And it was at this time that our working group shifted to an RSE focus. We began to have structured conversations with our RSE leads across all phases and spoke to small groups of children about how these were being delivered and whether they valued them. As you can imagine, there was a huge variation in what we found, but where the content was progressive and taught in a supportive environment, the children both appreciated what they'd learned and felt there was importance in it. I remember talking to a year 4 child and him telling me about a particular icky lesson. It was his words. I finally understood after some conversation that he'd been taught about wet dreams and erections, and I asked him what the teacher did to make him feel better, and he said, "Just take sips of my water," was his reply. And then when I said to him, "Did you need to be taught it?" he said, "Definitely." And that was a sign that we were getting it right. Why were some schools getting parental buy-in and others not? And I felt that at that time, parents were definitely being a barrier and affecting the views and the confidence levels of our PSHE leads. At Key Stage 3 and 4, it was a different picture completely. Whilst children and young people love drop-down days where we get experts in drama companies into school to focus on particular topics, young people said that lessons were often pointless if they already knew much of the content. They felt teachers, where in this particular school it was being delivered by tutors during registration time, were embarrassed to deliver the lessons and just click through a PowerPoint. Another question, how do we remove the awkwardness of topics and support staff in delivering RSHE? It was at this point we realised our aim was to ensure that a progressive, age-appropriate curriculum that was being delivered to children and young people in an inclusive and engaging manner, and that children valued it to meet the needs of children today. And we've had several conversations with parents along the way where they've said, "But my child is an immature year 7, they can't cope with that content." And my argument is that society won't differentiate between your immature or naive year 7. They're going to be exposed to the content regardless of their maturity levels. We recognised a key part of our journey was getting parental feedback, and we held 2 parent forums across different demographic areas within Surrey and asked a group of parents to state where topics should be taught. We'd done this ourselves many times, but I was interested in their perceptions, and there were still a handful of topics that left us without an answer. I remember talking to a lady during one of those evenings, and she picked up the FGM sticker. I asked her if she'd talk me through what she thought about it. It was one of the topics that we'd moved backwards and forwards. She immediately picked it up and put it in Key Stage 1. I asked why. She explained that her grandmother had been a victim of FGM, her mum also, and then her as a young girl. She brought her daughter to Britain to ensure she didn't receive the same fate. Such a powerful message to me, and that whilst it affects such a small number of girls each year, it has such dramatic consequences. Our next phase was the student voice. We wrote a questionnaire asking children what they knew and when they were first taught something and their opinions regarding safety, disclosures and RSHE lessons. We had 2,403 responses, and whilst there were lots and lots of positives, the majority of children knew who to talk to and if they had a worry or a problem, and would trust us to help. They would trust us to keep them updated and make sure they've got some levels of control. There were some areas for consideration. 37% of children asked said they didn't enjoy the RSHE lessons, and another 37%, you could say it was the same 37%, didn't believe that the RSHE lessons we were delivering were relevant. Children were asked, if you had a question regarding relationships or sex education that hadn't been asked in school, where would you go for the answer? 30% said the internet, 31% said parents, 23% would ask their friends, but only 7% would ask their teacher. However, 75% of children and young people said that RSE lessons were inclusive, and where children had experienced sexual harassment and discrimination, we were still finding that only a small percentage of people reported it, and the majority of those who hadn't experienced it didn't know how to report it anyway. So we knew there was still some work to be done around signposting children to getting help. So over the summer term, we set about writing our curriculum. It's definitely work in progress, and on some days it isn't progressive as I would want it to be. But I remind myself as a safeguarding leader, I have a skewed view of some of young people's lives, and it's a fine balance between writing a curriculum suitable for all. So our next steps this year is to pilot the curriculum. We know we want to focus on transgender guidance, and like Sarah, we're really frustrated that we're still waiting for this. But this will begin in the next few weeks, with or without the government guidance, potentially in conjunction with local authority, which I'm delighted about. We will want to focus on parental communication, emphasising to parents that we start the education in school, but empowering them to talk to their own children at home so that education continues at home, similar to what has been said earlier. We want to look at the quality of education while supporting non-specialists and developing high quality resources and focusing on ensuring appropriate, relevant RSHE in Key Stage 5 because we still feel that there's work to be done there. So lots to do, we've done lots, but lots to do, as I'm sure that lots of people would.
Thank you so much. That was a really energizing presentation because you've really covered all the bases in terms of consultation, going out to young people, going out to parents. And we did actually have a question that appeared in the Q&A about parents and about transparency. And I know one of the big themes of the discussion in the media around RSE is that schools are kind of being very opaque in what they're delivering. And we can't ever speak for every single school and the approach of every single school, but in our experience, schools do want to talk to parents about what they're teaching. And when they do tell them what they're teaching, as Maria was saying, often I think parents feel kind of reassured because it's much more mundane and basic and sensible than they suspect it's going to be. I just wondered if you had any kind of response to the concerns about transparency and how you've managed in your schools, Jo, to manage that and to ensure that teachers, that parents are getting as much information as possible about the work that you're doing.
It's still definitely work in progress, but we try to write to them every term and state what we want to teach. If anybody has any concern, we sit down with them one-to-one. And I know it takes a long time, but that's how you change culture and parental views around it. So it has been slow progress. Some schools and some areas are more on board with it, but there's still work to be done around it. But what we also want to do is we want to share with them resources, we want to share with them vocabulary, so we can actually upskill them as well.
Thank you, Jo. That's really helpful. We had another question as well, which I think you would be best placed on the panel to answer, which is about the issue of how you manage a disclosure or knowledge about underage sex. So a young person has spoken to a teacher about underage sex. In some schools, parents would be automatically informed as part of safeguarding. If a 15-year-old, for example, reported needing emergency contraception following consensual sex with a male of a similar age. I know this is something that we've actually talked a lot about, and it'd be really interesting to find partly how you might respond in that situation, but also how RSHE could support and preempt that kind of situation.
Yeah, it was an area that was really important to me about getting it right. So I worked with Brook, I suspect maybe 18 months ago, and we wrote some guidance on, because I felt that they were a bit like the transgender guidance. Actually, there's lots of staff out there wanting to do the right thing, but they don't know how to help and they don't know where the line is and in the guidance they can give, particularly signposting children to get the morning after pill, for example. So we wrote guidance in conjunction with Brook, and it is on our website. So if you want to go look for it, it is there. But I would say that high quality RSHE that signposts children to either school professionals or organisations like Brook make a big difference. I would also say our RSE curriculum is inclusive. So when we talk about safe sex, we talk about safe sex regardless of your sexuality. So we don't teach it separately. So there's no section of LGBT in terms of our curriculum. So I think that's important. It was important to us, and that's why we've done it that way.
That's brilliant, Jo, and I'm sure that's going to come up later in our conversation, and we'll explore that theme a little bit more. But that's really fantastic. I wish all schools were doing the level of kind of consultation. And what I thought was really interesting about it was the kind of iterative process that you're prepared to keep revisiting in line with what's going on out there. And I think we are very clear in Brook that we have to be really responsive because the context is changing all the time for young people. It's a bit like whack-a-mole. You know, we think we've dealt with one issue and another issue arises, and it's all happening very quickly. So I think that idea of being very responsive to the research, but also very responsive to all the kind of concerned stakeholders, the young people, the parents, the teachers, is really, really important. And that issue of talking to parents and transparency is one that we're all working on. And I think that people shouldn't be scared that schools are in any way trying to sort of actively deceive parents. I think schools are trying to manage the difference between kind of commercial resources and what they can and can't kind of share. So your method of getting people in, very, very resource heavy from a staffing point of view, but also very, very useful so that people can see exactly what you're teaching and exactly what's going on. So yes, very inspiring presentation. Thank you, Jo.
Thank you.
I'm going to move on to Ithar, and it'd be really brilliant if you could tell us a bit about your campaign and what you're aiming to do and where you're at.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you, Brook, again for having us here. So my name is Ithar Ghalifa, and I'm the strategist for the Make It Mandatory campaign. Make It Mandatory is a national survivor-led grassroots campaign started by my good friend Faustine, who unfortunately couldn't be here today. Last year in June, from her university bedroom, she started a petition on change.org after discovering that RSE was mandatory as of 2020 from years 7 to 11, but not a mandatory subject in Key Stage 5. After experiencing an abusive relationship of 4 years, starting at the age of 17, Faustine realized that if she had the knowledge and information about healthy relationships, and how to identify the signs of unhealthy and abusive behavior, perhaps she would have left sooner. The campaign focuses on implementing an inclusive RSE curriculum to make sure all young people are heard and seen. Since last June, Make It Mandatory has gained 94,000 plus signatures, gained the support of National Domestic Abuse Charity Refuge, cross-party support, and won the Young Campaigner of the Year by the Sheila McKechnie Foundation. According to the Office of National Statistics, 16 to 19-year-olds are most likely to experience domestic abuse than any other age group in the UK. Young people spend most of their formative years in school, and from the age of 16, we know many intimate relationships begin to develop. Safeguarding young people with RSE means providing them with accurate and age-appropriate information about relationships and sex, as well as skills and values to make informed decisions and stay safe. RSE can help young people to develop healthy and respectful relationships, whether intimate or not, prevent harmful sexual behavior, and protect themselves from abuse and exploitation. RSE should be student-informed and focused while being well-versed and specifically tailored to the communities and diverse backgrounds, and acknowledge the importance of creating intentional parent-student cohesive participation. With a staggering 10,000 plus comments on our petition on change.org, almost 75% of our comments are from parents who want this in their children's or in their child's curriculum and have shared their reasons as to why and some of their stories too. This just highlights how important it is to include parents and caregivers when it comes to supporting young people in order to provide safe environments and learn what can be life-saving knowledge. When it comes to highlighting the importance of safeguarding teenagers, an aspect which is often overlooked or not really spoken about is the diversity in which these young people encompass. From ethnic, religious, racial, and cultural backgrounds and genders, these undeniable identities need to be considered when safeguarding teenagers through RSE material and require a professional and personal understanding. This is why we're asking the government to not only listen to us, but to meet us as well. In July, the Women's and Equality Committee put a formal recommendation, which actually aligned completely with our ask of extending RSE to post-16 education. And although the committee has received a response recently, they are yet to release the response from the government. This is unfortunate, and the reasonings aren't adequate enough, knowing whether or not the government really thinks and believes that extension of RSE to such a vulnerable demographic is important enough, is something that should be made public, and we should act on that in that instance. When it comes to Make It Mandatory, we are a group of 6 friends who know Faustine personally and have come together to fight and lobby the government to make this change. We've done so in a year and 2 months, 3 months now, and we all do it voluntarily. When you want to make change, and you want to see change, you can definitely put in the effort to do so. And so from a young person's perspective, I think this is something that wholeheartedly we can say that there is a want for it, whether it's from us students or it's from parents too. We know that many people want it, especially young people.
Thank you so much, Ithar. It's really inspiring because you've got so many signatures on that, but actually, never mind the signatures, you've got to the Women in Equalities Committee, and the Women in Equalities Committee was actually the committee that really was the driver for mandatory RSE and for getting that legislation through. They really pushed on that. So I think you're talking to the right people, doing an amazing job. And the thing that impressed me most was the fact that you read 10,000 comments. So I don't know where you found the time in the day to do that, but very interesting that so many of them were from parents and so many of them were supportive. I do have one question to ask you about. You mentioned the issue of diversity.
Yes.
And this comes up a lot in relation to RSE, normally not in a very positive way. Quite often, minoritized communities are assumed to be or co-opted as enemies of RSE, people who don't want RSE. And I just wondered if you wanted to say anything about that.
Yeah, absolutely. As a Black Muslim woman myself, I think I can wholeheartedly speak for the diverse and the majority of ethnic background communities that this idea is sort of forced upon. I think there is a lack of wanting to include perhaps parents from ethnic backgrounds, from my experience, from when I was at school, but also after now, seeing my siblings and younger cousins in school too. We want to be a part of the conversation. We do encourage RSE within our cultures, but I think there is a language and cultural barrier when it comes to including them in this. Understanding their cultures and their religious backgrounds, the religious reasoning is one step forward to including them in the conversations, because they definitely do want to be a part of this. I think the notion that parents from ethnic backgrounds don't want to be a part of the understanding or influencing of their child's curriculum is completely wrong. We know that a high percentage of opt-outs, students who are opted out of RSE, are from religious and ethnic minority backgrounds, but that's only because they don't know what's being taught. And if we're not communicating to these parents that, oh, this is X, Y, and Z that is being taught to your children, you can then say and understand why they are opting them out when they have this idea that it's something negative and completely against what their beliefs are. So definitely including them into the conversation and putting effort into that, I think, is really crucial and definitely worth it. Like I said earlier, teenagers come in from all backgrounds, and if you're not accommodating to those backgrounds, then are we really are we actually fighting for them, or just the idea of RSE?
Yeah, I agree with that. Oh, sorry. I really agree with that. I've been doing some work recently with parents around how we bring them along into the conversation. How do we bring them with us? And the barrier of our parents don't know, they don't want to know, it actually is the barrier in itself. If we can overcome that and then bring them with us, many times when we speak them through the curriculum and show them what we're teaching, they're very much on board. So being better at that, us as professionals in this space, teaches all of us together, thinking of a way that we can be better at that, I think is really good. And hopefully after this, we can maybe have a chat and work together further as well about how we can all get better at that. We've just launched some new pages on our website this week for Sexual Health Week around for parents to see what RSE is and how we're delivering it, how we're teaching it. But that's a start. We could definitely build on that further. Sorry to interrupt you, but I thought that was a really good point.
Thank you.
I wanted to follow that up though, Eva. I really agree with you, Nick, and thanks for pointing towards our parents' pages, which I think have been, I think the links have been posted in the chat. I think the question that then arises is what is it that needs to be kind of accommodated? Because some people will say, well, certain information isn't suitable for certain people of different ethnicities. I think the guidance was very confusing around that, because it said to schools that everybody has this entitlement to RSHE, and then it said that schools have to kind of adapt it to the communities that they're working in, and it suggested that different children and young people should get different information depending on what their backgrounds were. And I just wondered what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, no, I don't believe that it should be different RSE for different communities. I think it should be the RSE. When I say accommodating, I mean that it is, the language is tailored for them to understand the content, right? And even the parents too. In perhaps it's a language barrier. I know that I come from a family where English is a second language, and so there are some things that aren't translatable to that language, or can be, but aren't really known. So in that aspect, that's what I mean in terms of accommodating. When it comes to young people, I think, yeah, we should teach RSE full stop, but we should, I'm lost, I've lost the words, but we should essentially create it in a way that's digestible to these communities too, because there's no harm in doing so. I'm sure that we have so many professionals in this field from different backgrounds that are able to put their input into this and actually inform decisions of, oh, actually, I know this school for instance, in Birmingham, that they did implement RSHE in a way that these communities, South Asian communities, were able to understand and accept that this was crucial because of something that they were familiar with in cases within their communities. So that's something that has actually been successful in the past. But in terms of, that's something that
so
when I say adaptable,
that's almost like finding champions within the community rather than assuming that you're only going to find obstruction and objection. I think that's a really great, useful message. I was going to ask you, Jo, if you had any thoughts or observations, because what Ethar's been talking about is about Key Stage 5 RSE, which we know is not mandatory, so some schools are doing it and some schools aren't. And I know this is an area that you've been exploring, so I don't know if you've got any questions for Ithar or any observations.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I've been going in and delivering some Key Stage 5 lessons all around consent in intimate relationships. So talking about graphically about what does consent look like, what does it feel like, what does it sound like, and the feedback has been so positive. The only criticism is that they want it earlier and that they're cross because actually, a bit like what you were saying in terms of Faustine's experience, that actually a child found me about 3 weeks after I'd delivered it, and she said, "I'm really cross with you. I needed this 2 years ago. I've been in a relationship that now I see is unhealthy."
Yeah.
So couldn't agree more with what you're saying. Yeah.
And I think when you think of all the obstacles to providing good RSHE in the lower years, there's the lack of curriculum time. There are sensitivities around age appropriateness. There's the right of parental withdrawal, which means that some people don't get very much RSE, if any at all. And then there's the kind of patchiness across schools. So people could enter the sixth form with very different experiences of having RSE. It just seems like an amazing, valuable opportunity, a space where we don't have issues around the age of consent, where we don't have such pressure on times. I mean, lots of logistics, but a bit more spare time between lessons. It just seems like a great opportunity. So I can't imagine why anyone would object to your campaign. I think it's absolutely brilliant, and we're totally behind it at Brook. I'm going to hand over to Nick now, who's one of our most senior educators, to talk a little bit about our experience of the classroom and how that fits with safeguarding.
Yeah, I hope I can add something further to the conversation surrounding this sort of the schools that I work with. I'm in a lucky position where I've worked within sexual health, I'd say for a number of years now. I won't say how long because I'll show my age, but I've seen the sort of changes in the development from before the policy to after the policy, but also seeing how schools in different parts of the country, both in England and Wales, have adapted to the guidances that they've been given, but also how they've adapted to the needs of the young people also. I think one of the things that I've seen, and a shift that I've seen in the last, in particular, 5 years, is RSE going from being quite sort of looking at the risk adversity, then looking at the sort of the shocking sides of it, the STIs, you're going to catch something, you're going to get pregnant, and doom and gloom. And it has moved more into the holistic, we could say it's more safeguarding, such as healthy relationships, consent, what a relationship should be looking like, what would be happening if you were witnessing or seeing domestic violence or violence within a relationship. And that shift's come from young people. That hasn't come from us saying to teachers, this is what you need to be teaching more of. Before this talk, I actually asked young people what is their most desired subject to be taught about, and it was for year 9, year 10 group, and consent came out straight away at the top. And interestingly, that we would class that as quite a key area of safeguarding for anybody in a relationship, whether you're a young person or an adult. So it's important to remember that this shift and this change and this desire for the way that RSE is looking now is being driven by young people if we let it and if we listen to them. I have quite close links with our participation teams here at Brook who feed into our education resources, which is what I look after, our trainings, which is like the one you mentioned, Joe, about traffic light tool, again, informed by young people and professionals. And listening to those young people, listening to that data is really important. So I think that's good. But there's also subjects that come up like pleasure, and pleasure may not be looked at something that is something that could be looked through a safeguarding lens. But actually, if you're in a relationship that isn't pleasurable and you're in a relationship that isn't feeling enjoyable and you're not having sex that is to the point of pleasure, then that isn't a safe relationship or a good relationship to be in either. So all the areas of RSE that we're teaching have a safeguarding element, but we also don't want to lose focus as well as on the, should we say, the mechanics of sex, the talking around sexual intercourse, talking about how that works and so on, also as being part of a healthy and happy sexual life. So I just wanted to add that point in there. And also, when I'm speaking to young people, there's two things that they're coming through for at the moment around their worries within RSE lessons. So one of them being, if I say something wrong in lesson, am I going to get in trouble? In particular, and I won't mention his name, but a particular online influencer, we'll call them, has had an impact on how young people are viewing themselves and how they're going to express themselves in RSE lessons. And it may be the only time young people can express their views around this subject. And so setting a safe space and really setting some time for those young people to understand the space that they're in and what they can say or what will happen if they do say something that's a little bit off the cuff, but getting shouted down, they will be challenged and being able to think critically around what they've been saying, what they've been thinking is really important. So that's the one main thing we're getting. And we've got lots of guidance and we've just developed a new training around how to deliver RSE, which is on our Brook Learn website, which will guide teachers through how to overcome some of those challenges, especially in this online influencer world. So do have a look at our Brook Learn website after the talk. But also we're getting to, and we're hearing from young people, if I do disclose something around my behaviour or a friend's behaviour in school, in particular in light of what's happened from the Everyone's Invited sexual assault and allegations in schools, they're worried what's happening with that, where that information is going to go. Are they going to, if I talk to Mrs. Jones about what's happened to me in a lesson, are my parents going to find out? Is that going to put me at risk? Are my friends going to get in trouble for it? And that's stretching out further from sexual assault. It's now re-emerging to what I saw probably 4 or 5 years ago with teachers worrying about if a person was LGBT, should they be telling parents? Well, actually being gay at 14 isn't a safeguarding issue. But actually teachers are worrying now and maybe young people are closing down on information and sharing information about where they're at, because in some cases they're worried that information may be going to a place that they don't have control over just yet. So some of those things are consistent over the years that I've worked in, but I'm seeing trends and things pop up again that weren't necessarily, or I thought were having a downward trend, and actually they're rising again. And I think those are good areas for us to look at as professionals and how we as sexual health experts or professionals can support teachers in that journey also.
So that's fascinating to hear how you feel things haven't changed. I mean, I haven't been a sex educator in a classroom for about 15 years, maybe a bit less. But at the time, one of the key things that we kept having to say over and over again, and you might have thought that message somehow would have seeped through society by now, were really clear messages about confidentiality. What's the scope and the limitation of confidentiality? Who can you talk to? And what kind of things can you talk about that don't need to be shared? And what kind of things you might disclose that will need to be shared for your own safety or the safety of another young person? I think it's really interesting that those questions haven't gone away. There is no population level understanding of that. So with every year group and with every generation of students, we still have to be really clear about that, and that's a really important part of safeguarding. We don't want people to hold on to very harmful information because they're scared and confused about what will happen to it. They need to know who they can talk to safely.
And I think this is, and I'm not just picking you up because you're here, Joe, but I think this is why the policy that you've wrote, and I know a lot of other schools have wrote, is good, because it's not just laying it out for teachers, or not laying it for parents, but young people can read through that as well. If I am going to come in and speak around, you know, I've had unprotected sex and need support with that, what's going to happen with that, and that safeguarding policy you've got, which I know you've shared in the chat, give some guidance around how you've managed to mitigate and to navigate some of that. And I think that is a really important part for schools to be looking at further, and what schools are asking for help and support further with. It's a little easier for us as healthcare professionals to just say Fraser and Gillick, and that's how we're covered, because I know that the schools and the safeguarding policies you have are a little bit more complicated and may have conflict with where we stand as healthcare professionals. But I think we can manage that and make sure that we're putting the young people first and their safety first, beyond the view of worrying about whether a parent or a carer is going to have to be the first point of contact. Actually, the safeguarding of that young person should be the ultimate aim. So yeah, just wanted to add that on also.
There's some really brilliant feedback to everything you've all been saying in the Q&A, and I'd like to sort of share some of it with you and some of the questions. Really brilliant feedback, Ithar, on your campaign and the work you're doing, which somebody described as incredible, and that you are all brilliant. And also lots of support in general for providing RSHE in Key Stage 5, as somebody describes, where it gets real. What you learned in Year 8 is now relevant, but you've probably forgotten it. So this all becomes real, and it's a brilliant time to be talking about it. So I think that's really great. There's a question about what we can do. Sorry, yeah.
I just add on to that. So it's not actually mandatory at Key Stage 5 yet. Like, they are, the responses that we've had from the Department of Education has literally been, we encourage them to teach about healthy relationships, but because they are in individual bodies, we can't like make that mandatory, which is quite contradictory to how they can make maths mandatory in Key Stage 5, but RSHE, which is, I would say, more important than maths, yeah, it's not yet. Hopefully it will be, but it's not yet mandatory, and that's what we're working towards.
But I'm sure after this webinar as well, we'll have a lot more people signed up to your campaign and in support. But a few more questions that have come up that I think are really interesting and people might want to talk about. Somebody noted that there needs to be more understanding and training around Gillick competency, which is all around young people's competence to consent to their own treatment, which is something which, again, there's quite a large lack of understanding about. Somebody asked how we can deal with the misinformation that is all over TikTok. I have got a very simplistic answer to that, which is that Brook did launch its first TikTok account this week. So that is going to be a safe space to see evidence-based information. There's been some sort of pushback in the Q&As around teaching about pleasure in relation to how that might make somebody feel if they have experienced sexual abuse. And I think it'd be really, I'd love to direct people to our position statement about teaching about pleasure, to understand why actually young people understanding what a sexual relationship could be and should be is a really important part of staying safe and not finding yourself in a dangerous situation or a really unhappy sexual relationship. And it's a very complex topic. We could do a whole webinar on that. So I don't think we've got time to sort of dig into that now. But I have got a few more questions coming up. One is a question for all the panelists. With the current climate of homophobia, transphobia and unsafety for many LGBTQ plus young people in the UK, how can we ensure those voices and experiences are being heard in developing and expanding RSHE in schools? I think just to add to that question, there is a petition which is going to lead to a debate in Parliament about whether we should include or exclude LGBT plus content from RSHE, and I think it's worth exploring for a couple of minutes, if you would, what we think the impact of that is in terms of safeguarding LGBT+ young people. Jo?
Let's say, so we have, whilst we started with a focus around sexual violence, sexual harassment in our reviews, we have this cycle be focusing on the life of LGBTQ+ children. And I would say that they just tell us it's tough being different. I mean, I think it's always been tough being different in society, but particularly when you're attracted to someone of the same gender. And I question whether the discrimination they receive is because we're not getting it right in the classroom. So they have questions, they're curious about the way that maybe two women would have sex because they haven't been educated about how two women have had sex or having sex in our RSE lessons. Not that necessarily would be so graphic, but there's a mismatch between the knowledge and the discrimination. And if we're aiming to create learning environments that are inclusive and free from discrimination, how do we create that if we act like LGBTQ community don't exist? So I would be, strongly advocating for the fact that they need to have a voice in it. The problem is that they are reluctant to come forward and talk to us, I found. So of our 2,400 children, 3% said that they identified differently than the gender they were assigned at birth, and a further 3% said that they preferred not to say. So we're assuming across our trust of secondary schools that between 3 and 6% are transgender children. But when we ask for groups of children to inform us, they're not quite there yet. So yeah, it would be really interesting to hear if anyone's had any success in trying to tease out views of transgender children and in this area.
Ithar, did you have anything to add to that?
I'll let Nick go ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah, it can be difficult because, again, this fear of putting themselves forward means that they're going to be in the spotlight and may not be ready to share their identity with other people just yet. I think you kind of hit the nail there, Jo. LGBT+ people exist in schools, therefore the curriculum should include them. But I also think there's quite a lot of misinformation about how much is taught around LGBT+ in schools. It's a very small part of the curriculum. We don't teach standalone lessons on LGBT+. We don't do lessons on gender or standalone gender lessons. It's just interwoven within the sessions that we're doing. So if we're talking about contraception, we may be talking about different types, or we may be talking about different types of sexual activity, or we may be talking about different families and relationships as we talk through a lesson. So there isn't like masses of information that is being separated out, but also that information, we're lucky that we have an LGBT+ forum and we have LGBT+ young people that are constantly telling us and challenging us about how we're teaching and how we're including the content within our lessons. And again, maybe that's another thing to think about. Maybe it's not just within the school having that forum, but maybe looking at forums outside of schools that you could tap into, and youth groups and other specific groups that can help you inform the work that's happening in schools. And we can always help and link in with some of that also, because we have participation groups and we have access to young people that are really vocal and want to support the work. And again, maybe that's something we can support with as well.
Thank you, Nick. There's a really interesting comment that I think in response to something you said, Nick,